Yay.
There we go.
All right. Yeah, so I think we'll just let people roll in for a few more seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, feel free to use the chat. We'll ask you to keep your microphones muted just to minimize the background noise. But yes, we do welcome we welcome your comments and your questions into the chat there, and we'll be watching and monitoring those. I will try to bring them up throughout the session. If our guests don't see it, I'll bring them up for them.
All right. So Tracy, you want to launch into the intro bit?
I certainly will. So thank you everyone for coming here today. We're really excited for this particular topic, and especially the guests that we have joining us today. But like many of you, both Julie and I have found that some of our most valuable learning happens when we're talking with other learning designers and discussing new trends, issues, and challenges that we have. And they're just sort of these hallway conversations and that we have at conferences or email exchanges or on different social platforms. So if you've ever wanted to eavesdrop on those conversations and that experienced designers are having, this is a place that Nerdy Shop Talk is trying to achieve that. So we welcome you here. I'm going to introduce Julie, who is an instructional designer, my co-host, and the author of Design for How People Learn. It's one of the best-selling instructional design books available, and some of you might have it as a textbook in your classes right now. She is a respected international speaker and instructor and has been recognized as a guild master by the Learning Guild.
Yeah, and my co-host is Tracy Parrish, who's just one of those people who gets things done. She's an educational technology specialist, and she can kind of do everything. It's sort of magical, like instructional design, project management, development. She's a frequent speaker at industry events and an articulate community hero. She's a moderator of LearnChat, and she curates this amazing list of free e-learning resources at our site. And I'll go ahead and introduce the other people that are here as well. We have Ellen Wagner, who is
hello.
Are you an instructional design goddess? You're a source of the things in the field, and have had many roles, including some really interesting work on kind of data-driven efforts in learning technology. What's your actual PhD in, Ellen?
It's in learning psychology with a specialization in instructional design systems.
Perfect, beautiful. And you're currently the interim director of the ACT, which is, remind me,
it's the land of professors. It's the Association for Educational Communications and Technology.
Thank you.
And I'm not quite official yet. I become the official interim executive director on the 1st of July, which is coming up next week.
Soon. Yeah. And one of the first presentations I think I ever saw you do was one at a guild event several years back, where you were talking about kind of the different domains that people come into in instructional design at, and kind of where there are different sources for things. And so we're super excited that you're here for the conversation. We also have Dr. Jane Bozarth, who is, you're the director of research for the Learning Guild?
I am. Okay. They let me pick my title. They would not let me have goddess or mistress of evil or any of the things I wanted, but
Zarina of all the research papers.
I sit around, I direct. Yes, I direct.
Yes. Excellent. And knowledgeable about all the instructional design things. We also have Cammy Bean, who it's super delightful to see her face, because it's been a long time since we've all been in the same place together. Among other things, another sort of instructional design goddess, but also the author of The Accidental Instructional Designer. And so somebody who's put a lot of thought into particularly that sort of pathway into the field and things like that. So that is our collection of people. And we kind of wanted to have this conversation because we've all had this. I don't know, Tracy, do you want to talk a little bit about the...
Yeah, so it's sort of like, oh goodness, working at home, there's a dog that's messing up with my TV here, my monitor. So at some point in our careers, we're sort of hearing that you've encountered this idea, and we just had this conversation earlier today, that anyone can do instructional design. There's free trials out there for Articulate, and you just get that 60-day license and you can go ahead and build e-learning for everyone. But we know it's a lot more than that. So we want to kind of discuss, where do these beliefs come from? And we want to know whether, are we really a profession? Are we a discipline? Are we a craft? Where does ID fit into this realm of what a profession is or isn't?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with that one. I pulled some definitions, and they're a little bit hacked together about this, but we found an interesting definition of profession saying it's a disciplined group of individuals who adhere to ethical standards and hold themselves out and are accepted by the public as possessing special knowledge and skills in a widely recognized body of learning derived from research, education, and training at a high level, and who are prepared to apply this knowledge and exercise these skills in the interest of others. So I thought that one was actually really interesting because it's talking about a body of knowledge. I think there's the implication that there's some kind of recognition of when you have some mastery of that body of knowledge, whether it's a certification or a degree or something like that, but not necessarily. It's not, a certification or degree is not necessarily built into the definition. So that's one we found for profession. I do think the ethics piece is really interesting in there. For discipline, I just found a short definition for that one that is a particular area of study, especially a subject studied at college, university. Like that's just sort of like, hey, there's a thing around this. And then a craft was another interesting one, implies an activity involving skill or experience in the creation of tangible objects that fulfill a particular purpose. It's defined as the production of those objects that have utility for people. It's a learned ability which is acquired by a person through regular practice. Often it begins as an apprentice under a master craftsman, or and a craftsman's often an expert in their field of endeavor, but there's a continual learning piece to it. They're, constantly learning about new tools or evolving it. They might do continuing education, certification, books, trade publications, industry groups, some of those kinds of things. So we've got these sort of three things. There's this idea of a profession. There's this idea of just a discipline, which I think is just saying, here's a subject or a thing. And then there's this idea of a craft, which is sort of learned through exposure and practice and things like that. And obviously, I think all of those things happen in instructional design.
Yeah.
But the question is, do we feel like if we look at the preponderance of people who are identifying as instructional designers, do we feel like it lands in one of those areas a little bit more than some of the others?
Can I jump in and then just add a thing to that? The other thing that we have to make sure is part of this conversation is the notion of a job, because the thing that I think sort of levels a lot of the definitions is that for a lot of people, when they come into this field, they're looking for a job. And there's lots of stuff that we're going to be able to do. I mean, we know how to write, we can take pictures, we can do a lot of the things that when aggregated can be used to create learning content. Imagine that. Wow, that means maybe we can be instructional designers. Well, there's a difference between having a job and making money and having a profession where you can make money and you have all the other aspects of what you were just talking about, where there's going to be craft associated with some of it. And there's going to be, what were some of the other things? The discipline of following some of the content. So I think what I kind of realized we were going to have trouble, collective we, not me and my multiple personalities, but them too, that trying to get oriented in instructional design was going to be really tough when you realize that you start in your first classes learning about it. When people say, well, we talk about instructional design, but we're really talking about instructional design with capital I, capital D, but we're talking about design with small d and small I, because sometimes instructional design is small, and sometimes it's the profession, and sometimes we do it in classes, and sometimes we do it over here when we don't have tests. And when you listen to people talking about this as a newbie, it makes it sound like it's so freeform that one might think, well, this is a profession that has no rules.
Right.
Yeah.
But I like the job thing, because I'm like, you wouldn't, I think most people wouldn't say that customer service is a profession with a body of knowledge behind it. Like that's a job, right? Like you get a job as a customer service rep, you might be better or worse at it, or, and develop in it and things like that. But I think we wouldn't call that a profession. So I think that's a useful distinction.
Well, and I think most people come into the field with the job as an entry point. That's how I got into instructional design, right? I got a job. I had a job title on my card, and then it became a craft then it became a profession for me and a passion, right? And at some point I made that decision to go from job to profession.
Well, and I think a lot of times that's not the job. You're in a job and they find out you can speak in public and suddenly you're a trainer. And then suddenly you're,
That's right.
you're designing
Yeah.
instruction, and all of a sudden, oh, I are an instructional designer now. I mean, I see an awful lot of people who didn't grow up saying they wanted to be instructional designers who ended up in this business. They came through some other door. And I think that also speaks to the problem of, oh, well, anybody can do it. And no, we don't have to have a background or any sort of agreed upon standards for it.
And yet, this is also where the differentiation that a lot of us experience in our professional development would say that for those of us who have found a way to affiliate with other professionals who have standards of practice that are recognized by others, and if we understand that there are, the ethics of our work, that we agree that, as in medicine, that in learning we must do no harm to people. And when we find out that there are things we're doing that, like in analytics, we discovered how much we were doing that was actually causing harm. Wow, who knew? Well, so the obligation then is, then you have to stop doing that. But if you don't spend your time around people who are also looking at all of this, I think it can be very, very difficult to do, as Cammy was saying, which is that, we all start off learning how to do stuff, but then when we want to get better and we want to be recognized for that, you do have to find the guidelines. And if we don't take care of ourselves and have some type of expectation of ourselves, of what we are as professionals, well, then we will accept some of the crappy wages that we get. And we accept some of the job descriptions that say, I'll do everything you tell me to do and be grateful for the opportunity. And, sometimes we need to have our own colleagues say, you know what, it's okay to not work for $7.50 an hour on some of this stuff, even though we all know that a lot of us take our craft, and because we want it to be really good, that sometimes we work for a lot less than that, don't we? Anyway, just some thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Kim.
I've been really struck recently, and so I published The Accidental Instructional Designer in 2014, and I'm preparing to do an update to it. So I've been rereading it, which has been fun. And the first couple of chapters mention a lot of you in it. And Ellen, in 2010, we had a session at Learning Solutions in Orlando. It was you, me, and Corrine on stage talking about shades of instructional design, right? And it was this conversation. And yesterday I had a conversation with Alexander Salas, who does a podcast, and it was this conversation. And nothing has changed. And he made it, I think, an interesting point yesterday. It's just like e-learning is so hot right now. Online learning is so hot right now. There's so many jobs out there. People are dying to get, there's a lot of, if you've been reading any of the job reports out there, it's the summer of quitting, the great resignation, people are moving careers, and it's going to be a huge influx. And are they all going to be running for instructional designer jobs because they're out there and because companies need online training now? And I think there's going to be this influx of it. And the conversation hasn't changed in all the years I've been doing this,
But you know what has changed, Cammy? And this is the thing that's going to be the biggest I gotcha on this, is that there are algorithms and metrics starting to be developed that define expectations of performance. Mm-hmm. And we can't avoid the data. And data, whether or not we are good at using it or we are getting better at using it, I think that's the case. What's different now, and we used to be able to talk about this stuff and say it's not changing, is that the change is going to be forced on it by the part of the companies that never really knew what learning people did anyway. But now they're really going to say, if you can't literally affect my bottom line with what you're doing, then we got ourselves an issue here. And I think we weren't doing that in 2010. And this is the amount of algorithmic, the amount of people who are now creating instructional design programs based on the algorithms that we use for doing our work to bring this in.
Are you talking about at universities when you say instructional design programs and people? What are you referring to there?
I'm talking about software which takes algorithms, all those, all those instructional design models that we point to were always designed as heuristics. They were like people scribbling on paper, talking to each other and saying, here's how I do it. And they hand it off to one another. And then when people who aren't as proficient as say like we are, they would say, oh, well, that's a model, capital M, and that's the way that this is done. The minute that you go from being like a heuristic or a rule of thumb when you're talking to other designers and you get into something which is a model, capital M, it becomes an algorithm. An algorithm is something you can program. That is what is being done in a lot of the apps that we use right now. And the thing that's going on in the background around us at the moment is that there are people who believe that instructional design is so simple that you can just take all those algorithms and put it in software, and you can design all kinds of tools that will in fact automate the whole process of instructional design.
Yeah, well,
What do we do with that?
It's an interesting thing because the like profession versus craft, right? I have a master's in instructional systems technology, and you learn to process and you learn your ADDIE and all of these kinds of things. But I would tell you that there are people who have come out of master's programs that I think are just not terribly great instructional designers, and there's people who don't have degrees at all who are fantastic instructional designers. And I do think there's that craft piece in there, right? Like, you try some things, you see what works, and you learn from that is a bigger differentiator than like formal education on some of that. And I'm not sure what the implication of that is, but I do think it's an interesting.
Well, one of the things we did find over the past year, it was raining work on people in this business, particularly freelancers or people that wanted to add a little extra. But it was not being driven by anything except what we call emergency remote teaching. Suddenly everybody had to get their stuff online. Right. A lot of it was in the form of traditional, asynchronous e-learning, but a lot of it was, can you get this on Zoom and can you do it by Monday? So, there wasn't really any kind of plan behind it or any kind of anything behind it, but sort of panic for months and months. But that helped us out a whole lot. So I do think, to what Cammy was saying, it's starting to shift. But well, a lot of it didn't start there. It started from holy cow, we've got to close all our buildings and everybody's at home. What are we going to do? Right.
I kind of want to know what you think about that, Jane and Cammy. Like, what do you think about it starting to, well, there was just an influx of all of that design and people doing it. Is that watering down, I guess, if we're calling ourselves a profession, is that watering down the profession and just the bad is going to be acceptable because there is so much just, here's a PowerPoint on Zoom for 3 hours and I'm going to talk to every slide that I'm showing you?
Oh, well, some would say it's already happened, and now we're just accelerating that acceptance of less than, I mean, I'm not less than what? Less than professional graphics, perhaps. I mean, I guess what we are able to do now that's different because of tools, and some of the people coming into this, I mean, they can produce stuff that gets content created and out the door. Is it good? Not necessarily so. Is it worse than where we were before the remote learning twist? Well, absolutely, because I think to Jane's point, it was raining work and people needed to have hands that could actually work with multimedia. So here we go. Is it good instruction? Well, is this not the thing that all of us in our field, let's just say, I'm going to go to a fourth word, is that not the type of thing that we've been, challenged on ever since we went to rapid learning tools? Anybody can pick this stuff up. Anybody can produce this stuff.
I don't think it's any different right now. I think the scale is just different. So the pandemic kind of amplified a lot of this stuff. I think,
yes.
To Jane's point, a lot of crap got created in the last year, I'm sure, at organizations because they had to. There was no choice. You had to get stuff up online really quickly. But what we're starting to see, and I'm a vendor, we're Kinea, we design custom learning solutions for organizations. There was a lot of people coming to us looking for what we would call low value work, that they just wanted quick turnarounds. That's not what we do. Door is opening up. People are starting to look at what got created last year and go, that's not very good, right? And we need to get better. So hopefully there's a bit of a sea change here, as a lot of people saw a lot of crappy stuff get created. I think the other thing too is that, and I'm just seeing this across clients, is people are thinking about learning experiences differently. It's not, people are trying to think about how to create a higher quality experience. And maybe this is just who I'm interacting with in terms of the customers out there, but the bar is getting higher is what I want to say on the solutions that get created out there.
Well, and what I would say, we were talking about for 6 or 8 months emergency remote teaching, but we are starting to see a shift to, we understand what's good and what's bad. We recognize that we were in a hurry and we need to make this better now. One of the things we found, Megan Torrance did a survey for us earlier this year, and one of the things we found was that L&D felt like the last year had been an opportunity for them to catch up. People who've been kind of behind the curve on getting stuff online and doing e-learning felt like they could finally get caught up with their peers. And they felt that they finally were getting that voice at the table we've been asking for so long, as all of a sudden the organizations recognized the training was important and teaching people stuff matters, and they're not here where we can watch them all day. So I do think, I agree with Cammy, I think we are seeing it go from emergency remote teaching to a more thoughtful approach. Not just generating stuff. You know, the big thing wasn't really with what we are calling e-learning, it was with getting everything into Zoom.
Yeah.
And people started just doing
right.
day-long 8-hour stretches that were killing people. So, but now they're recognizing that also needs design. It's not just a presentation pushing slides for 3 hours. You also have to have some kind of understanding of how this stuff works. So I think it's getting better.
Yeah.
I do think there's openings for people now. I think that things are opening up. There will be jobs.
So one of my theories about this, and I want to ask you why you think this sort of anybody can do it attitude exists. I was telling Tracy a story about, this is probably, I don't know, 15 years ago now or something like that, but I was working for an organization. I've been working there for several years as an instructional designer. I had a degree in it, all this kind of stuff. And one of the programmers, the developers that we had who built stuff at the time in Flash was like, oh, I'm really interested in instructional design. I'd like to learn about it. And a week later, one of the project managers, and we're like, oh, okay, great, that's lovely. We happy to sort of help mentor you on that and stuff. But a week later, one of the project managers wanted to slot him in as the ID on a project. And I was just like, oh, so they expressed interest a week ago and now they're qualified. Neat. What do you think they do? But that belief, right, that anybody can do it. Like I said, I have some theories about why that is, but I'm curious what you all think about why that belief exists, that it's not hard and that anybody can do it.
Because there are a lot of people in the business that think learning looks like school. And if you can present something that looks and feels like school, well, then certainly people must be learning. I think that there's a gap there somewhere.
Well, and we all went to school, and therefore everyone can teach that. You went to school, you can do what they did.
Right.
And I think that translation to a digital format, though, people don't get that there's even more nuance and subtleties to how you design instruction for a self-paced experience. Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, that's right. Well, and this gets back to the thing that I'm watching taking place in professions outside of learning and development. That's taking place, say, in computer science in particular, data science, but computer science in particular, where do you remember the MOOC experience when Sebastian Thrun and those guys all of a sudden realized that you could teach a class in computer science to 160,000 people? And they were like, oh my God, we've discovered distance learning. Well, they did. And in fairness, in their world, they had never done that before. The fact that educators had been doing it in smaller and different kinds of ways for 25 years at that point, maybe 30 years, I guess, was not on their radar at all. And there are many reasons for that. And some of them have a lot to do with the fact that it's sort of like going back to school. Well, the extension of what comes from this, most of those programs are put together by electrical engineers or computer scientists doing a lot of the data background. And I watched these folks to this day continue to describe themselves as, I have my 3 electrical engineering degrees from MIT, and I am a specialist in education. Because what they have that some of us don't have is technical acumen in areas that other people don't understand. And if you can program this stuff to do like learning looking things, then you must be doing e-learning. Now, what we all don't recognize is that over the last 20 years is that this is, this is not just a brand new thing that people have discovered. There are fields like computer science that really think that that they do learning and they're the only ones who do learning because they can make machine models of it. Um, and what is a little bit disturbing to me is that this is, in fact, what's being programmed into new software, which is starting to get all kinds of investment right now because remote learning showed everybody what Jane was saying, that we can actually do this stuff online now. So there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs at the moment who are taking what it is that we do on the job side and on the craft side, and they're turning it into code, algorithms, and they can produce this for other
And
people.
how do you feel about this, Ellen? Are you in support? Are you anti? What's your take?
Well, Cammy, what's weird about it is that I'm watching it with vague horror and recognition that by virtue of our people not having any way to step up to that with the research to show the difference, what we do is we get really emotional about it and say, hey, we're already doing this and we're learning and you're poopy heads. I mean, we're not very professional about it because it's like, well, you're just stupid engineers. You don't know anything about how people's brains work. And with all due respect, we get really emotional about that. We're losing our opportunity to actually have anything to say. Where I'm living this on a day-to-day basis now, as some of you guys might, we were talking about it a little bit before, I'm stepping in to take over an executive directorship of a 100-year-old association dedicated to professors of what has over the last 100 years been everything from AV education into distance learning and online learning and instructional design and all this stuff. And I'm going to tell you a little something that we'll share in the webcast. A lot of the people who are the professors in these programs wouldn't know how to do a code string if it bit them on the toe. It doesn't make them any less relevant for doing the type of research we're doing about learning and performance, but they can't talk about it either. So how do I feel? I feel like we've gotten to a point where it's 2021 and all this stuff that we used to do is sort of nice as a foundation. But we're all about to get punked because we don't know how to stand up to people who are technologizing what it is that we think we do. So Julie, it really upsets me to hear your story.
Right. Well, and I have a different question that occurred to me. Juan said something a few minutes ago about licensure and regulation. If I said tomorrow morning that I decided I'm going to go teach the 5th grade, nobody would let me do that. There would be committees, there would be people coming in to stop me, there would be people wanting to see my license, wanting to see my certifications. Why is it we can't seem to get any kind of certification or real regulatory oversight at all of what we do? We have it for accountants, we have it for doctors, we have it for therapists, we have it for 6th grade teachers. Why is it so difficult? Where is the problem with getting it treated like it's credible? Because once upon a time, I think you just had to be an unmarried woman to be a teacher. I do think at some point, right, that got to be something somebody said, we ought to pay a little more attention to who's doing this.
Yeah,
I'm just asking, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of rhetorical, but I could not go do that tomorrow. People, by the way, nobody's going to let me teach the 6th grade. Just, that would never, I would not let me be around them. Jane, hear the little children.
You're spot on this. This is, because people like us, it will ultimately come down to two things. People like us realizing that until we band together, that we're going to get steamrolled a little bit. So we all have to sort of stand together and say, no, we have a profession and we do have expectations of ourselves. But then we've got to figure out a way to make that a value proposition that matters to customers, where they're going to get more for the fact that they can recognize that we are as good at we do and pay for that. And it's not that they won't, because you see it with programming, just not in how we do it. So part of this is our own, how are we going to represent ourselves and make our value proposition clear? I think these actually are times when it is, we're either going to have to step up to it as a profession, or we're going to find that, in the same way that everybody can use Word and everybody can pretty much use PowerPoint, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the best writer in the world or the best presenter in the world.
I also want to say the other side of that is that despite all of those things, there are still plenty of really bad 6th grade teachers.
Right. So I have this theory that
Kathy keeps like giving me like she's evangelizing me, and I like it a lot. I like it. It's very reaffirming. So, but yeah,
It's just that you guys keep making points. I mean, I'm in a position right now where I was senior manager of a center of excellence for a technology company. And so my team was responsible for the standards. But we have found because technology moves at the speed that it does, it is not enough. People, all walks of life, want to create content in our environment. And what we're finding is, hey, we've got a lot of enablement teams. They have a background, they do it, and they're pretty self-sufficient, but there are an enormous amount of part-timers who are subject matter experts who have been told you need to create a module on this topic. And they just think they want to run off and do this. I have now moved into the role where I am going to be a consultant to try to get them to not just, it's all e-learning, to not just create content and slap it up there, put a video or a bunch of words up there and call it a training. So I'm in that position now where I'm hoping to get them to see that this is not how you would want to learn if you were on the other end of it. So I'm hearing a lot of the things you're saying, and I'm like, it's so true. And I'm hoping I'm in a position now where maybe I can create a little bit of change and get people to think a little bit differently about it. But it is very difficult to do when you have the CEO of the company who wants to look at everything and sign off on everything and thinks there's nothing wrong with taking a recorded webinar with really bad audio and video issues and calling it something that he wants to put out in front of all of our clients and customers and partners.
Yeah.
What you can say to him though, Kathy, and I think this is the time when enough of us are good, and then we all get to back you up. I mean, so this is sort of where the profession steps in. You could say to your CEO, you would never let a piece of marketing collateral go out of this shop like that. Why would you do that with anything else?
He shot down, we were using Articulate, and he shot it down because you can't fast forward through the video. You can't speed it up. They want to use like the Rise type of format where you have sections and you have, you know, mostly video and text. And I'm like, okay, but we need to do more with it. And I cannot tell you how many arguments I've had where I've said, who is the learner? Is it you? You know all this stuff.
Yeah.
This is not, somebody's not going to watch it in 2x speed if they've never seen this. And they speak another language as a first language.
Oh, wow.
But I
Yeah.
still use it. You know,
Well,
it's a process.
You know, I mean, I think there's that piece of it, right? What you're talking about, which is, you know, he's watching it and feeling impatient with the fact that he can't fast forward through it, despite the fact that you're right. He totally knows this. And so you're not representative of the target audience. So my theory is, and I want to throw this out and get people's reaction to it, is that when the output is clear and easy to understand, people think it wasn't hard to produce. So like when people write computer code and you don't know how to code, you can't read the computer code and make judgments about it. It's obtuse. Or medical jargon is obtuse, or legal jargon is obtuse.
That's why I love analytics. That's why I love analytics.
Right.
People think I'm smart.
Exactly, because the output is obtuse, or, you know, or parts of the output are obtuse with analytics. Hopefully not all of it, but like that, when we produce something, it's by definition, if it's good, it's not obtuse. It's very clear. It's very easy to understand, and because people are having an easy time understanding it, they think it wasn't hard to make it that way. So that's my theory about part of the reason why they think anybody can do it, because they look at this and they go, well, that's an obvious output for this thing. That shouldn't have been hard to do.
And what I created wasn't that good, but it's close enough. It kind of does the same thing. It's fine. I mean, as we're talking, what is striking to me, I said this earlier, is nothing has changed. I mean, in 2005, we were arguing about this and like who gets to be an instructional designer and who can be an accidental instructional designer. Is anything ever going to change? And I think, you know, there's always going to be grassroots training that happens within corporations, particularly, right? Like you have a small startup company and, oh, we need to have training. And hey, Joe, can you put together a, a quick PowerPoint deck, or you're the manager, just you have to coach your employee through this. And that's how a lot of training departments evolve at organizations,
Right.
is sort of this bubble up. And that's not going to change. I feel it's very high, not high and mighty. That's probably not the right. We can be here, rattling our swords and things like that, but I don't know. Maybe I've just gotten cynical because we're having this same conversation we've been having for 20 years since
Well,
I've been having this conversation.
I'm
So
wondering
how
if
can we change it? What needs to change?
I'm wondering if it's going to go the other way. We've got all these authoring tools that are much, much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if we're going to start seeing some of this work just shift back to subject matter experts.
Well, I think with Rise, and I think Kathy, you just mentioned Rise, right? Definitely seeing that.
So is training going to become less centralized and get farmed out? I mean, is the problem going to get worse? I think is my question.
Well, does more crap get created? Yeah,
That's where I'm glad. That's where I'm glad that they're shifting me into a role, because where the authors are saying, listen, if they want to use subject matter experts to get it out, we have a 6,000 person company. There's a lot of lines of business. We don't have the bandwidth to create their content for them. So if that's the case and they're being tasked and incentivized to create their content, and they are willing to work with me and help me make some points, I can't get them to change them necessarily, but if they are willing to work with me and let me review their content and help them point out some things that might make it more empowering and better for the learner, then it's a step in the right direction. But that requires companies to invest in somebody to be that liaison. And I'm not sure that a lot of companies are going to do that.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to so along those lines, we know that we see IDs with instructional designers with degrees who can't do anything practical. And we've seen accidental IDs who can do amazing things. So what does that say about the importance about degree programs anymore? Do we need them?
Sure we do. That's a false comparison, Tracy. You can't take one person who's a klutz and say all degrees are icky. Mm-hmm. So I'll help nail that one shut quickly. But your point is that not everybody, let's face it, half the people who graduate from medical school are in the lower half of their class. So you just have to kind of put it in perspective. Having a degree doesn't mean you're competent. It means that you've completed a degree program. The hope is that there are correlations between completing a degree program and having learned the things that we're talking about that make you think more like a professional, that there are rules for the game, that you do in fact have processes that you follow, that we do have ethics about how we try to persuade people to change how they're doing something in work. I don't think degrees are the only way to get things done. And we're absolutely seeing that right now. There's a great rush toward certifications and competency-based types of programs, which are not necessarily like degree programs. But in the panoply of all the things that we can do to create a profession, the degree is part of, it's like your passport, because it shows that you have been through a process that differentiates you from people who are just going to pick up an application, learn how to do some cool stuff with it, and not think about the implications of what's going on in the practice of why the content. I'm looking at Kathy. Thank you for shaking your head, Kathy, because without having the framework for why the content is being created and to what purpose it is going to be applied, frankly, if I could have people, right now I find myself sometimes I go out to Fiverr and I hire people to make me content. I don't have to have somebody who's sitting around thinking about the learning from some of my content. Sometimes my content is just like stuff. Like I have to have facts. I have to have a graphic. And Fiverr is a really nice place for me to find somebody who can give me a really nice graphic quickly. But can I use that? Sorry?
No, go ahead. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
But once I have my graphic, I might know better how to use that graphic in a setting where I can help people understand a relationship of something to something else better. So, the point is, I think that our jobs have all changed a lot. Some people are just going to be really, really good at production. And if we're blessed to have people who take the time to learn about why it works well, Well, more is the better for us. Maybe what
Yeah.
instructional designers are going to be is more like the middle manager who has to find all the pieces to put together the experience or the product.
Well, and that's
We-
been an interesting thing too, right? Because there's been such a focus, and I think the current technology really leans into it pretty heavily, which is that learning design is somehow about structuring content, right? It's about information delivery. It's about a nice video. It's about, text plus images. It's about, whatever, and very little about like things like designing practice intervals or, really that kind of skill development and things like that. And so I'm wondering if, I think that's part of it, right? Like, there's also, like if you know stuff that other people don't know, that is one of those things that creates a little bit more respectful, acknowledgement. I'm not proud of it, but I will admit that usually the first time, and those people who know me know that this always happens in a conversation where at some point I'll be like, well, there's a research study that says, like that's for good or ill, as part of my nerdiness, that will show up in conversation sooner or later. But when I'm doing a client meeting, the first time I say that, I'm aware of a little bit of like a slight change in the people around me because I just demonstrated that I know something that they don't know about, this.
Yeah, I was talking on the point of degrees. I talked to Carl Kopp about this a few weeks ago, and he does run the program at Bloomsburg, so he has a dog in that fight. But his argument, back to something else we were talking about, is that we've got to find some sort of credentialing instead of people just saying I'm an instructional designer. There's got to be something else if we expect to, as Cammy said, to not keep having this conversation for 20 more years.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of why we've continued to have the conversation, because
But there
by
are also
lowering
some-
the entry, if anybody can do it, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be good.
There are also some schools now doing an undergraduate degree in ID or HRD with some ID coursework involved. At least they get that much, right?
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's a different world. When I was growing up, we had never heard of e-learning, right? My kids have now
Right.
spent a year learning
Right.
online. It's going to be a different path going forward. And probably 10 years ago, I wouldn't have necessarily urged people to go out and get a degree in instructional design if you're practicing. There's great books out there. There's a lot you can read if you have the craft and you have the passion. You could do it on your own. But and I read Jane's report last week. Just to see what had changed, if anything has changed in that part of the conversation. And I think I would, if we're hiring someone in a learning consultant role, I would definitely be looking for someone with a degree, probably, to speak that language, to know the secret handshakes, as Ellen Wagner says, right, of instructional design, and that would be important. And I think someone coming into the field, there's going to be a lot of jobs out there right now, but you're going to differentiate yourself as a candidate if you have a degree or a certification or whatever, and it's going to help. And I think that path through, like, get a job and you go, wow, I like this. Well, maybe you should go get some professional schooling in it. That's not what I would have said 15 years ago. So I've changed my mind.
Yeah, well, back to Tracy, though. Tracy started that by saying we've got these people with degrees who can't do anything. A good degree program for like an undergrad or a master's, you should leave with a portfolio. You should have something that shows you can do it and not just talk about one of my interviewees said, if you're coming out just talking about adding, you haven't been served well by your
Sure.
Right?
Well, and the reality too is the job descriptions out there. Looking on the Learning Guild site at all the job postings for instructional design this week, and the vast skills that they want people to do, it's mind-boggling. I mean, it's definitely a unicorn. Like, you need to have good visual design, you got to write, you got to be a project manager, it's all the hats that we've talked about wearing, and it's totally overwhelming. And I don't know where they find people who meet all of those criteria.
And unfortunately, the filter is a degree. If you've got 400 applications and 10 of them have master's degree, that's the first pile. But I have a question. Raise your hand if you were a humanities major as an undergraduate.
I was humanities.
English major, history major.
English.
History. I was a history major.
If you can't write, you're kind of out of luck. I think if you can't write, you're in trouble in this business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at all. Yeah.
That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Well, so, that raises, this is the point, the competencies that we possess that we would take into ID are going to serve us if, we get our degrees in English or history or whatever, we had to learn how to write. If you end up coming through like a computer science program where you're learning how to do some type of coding, if you're learning to do some type of analytics work, I mean, bringing these types of skills into learning is going to be really essential. I think this was the place that the skills we needed when some of us started doing this work 20 years ago are not the expectations of skills that are going to differentiate you now in places where you'll be doing more strategic work. Now, if that means that we all have to, I hate the fact that I have to go back and take classes, but I do. And even if I'm not necessarily doing the work, because if I can't at least, stare somebody down in a meeting and say, or to not say I know more than you do. I can't just say it. I have to be able to talk the language and to demonstrate some knowledge, or I can't hold up my own in a meeting anymore. So
So, yeah, the other thing that's happened in the job field this year, to what Cammy was saying about her kids, a lot of teachers have had enough. Teachers had a real hard year last year, and it is not unusual to see, I want to switch to corporate learning. How do I get into corporate? How do I make the move? And they don't understand there is a difference. I think that is a great spot for a certificate, not a 2-year degree, but something 3 months, 2 or 3 classes to get them sort of caught up. We're seeing a lot of that, and a lot of people asking, how do I break into this? I've been a teacher for 11 years, and it's feeling the same thing.
And your audio is getting a little funky.
Me?
Your audio is getting a little funky. I agree. I mean, I've got the Design for How People Learn Facebook group, and I get probably a couple of people a day where they're, I always ask, what's your interest in instructional design? I get a couple of people a day, probably for the last month or two, probably more. I mean, longer than that, but like consistently, of people who are like, I'm a classroom teacher who wants to transition into ID. And I get it. I get that, like, this has just been a brutal year.
Horrible.
And, and a lot of them are not getting paid enough to deal with the brutal pieces of it and things like that. And I do agree that, like, okay, you should be a good person to transition to ID, but it's not like you can just start doing it tomorrow at a level where, you can necessarily get a job. So I'm interested in this credentialing piece. So if we were, because honestly, we have people here who could participate in that conversation, certainly, and would have influence in it. But who's the right credentialing body then? Is it, because there's the academic piece, right? Like you can get a degree or a certificate, but then there's also, like, typically that's an external body, so if you're an accountant, you can get an accounting job without a CPA, but like the CPA is issued by an accrediting body of some sort. And so where's the place to kind of like lean into? Because I think, the guilds or ATD or stuff like that aren't necessarily the right organizations to drive that, but maybe.
Well, we need to have
nothing.
but we're going to have a body of what we agree is practice for IDs or whatever it is that we certify. And I guess what I've been watching lately is that IDs as a practice are actually sort of out of favor when compared to learning experience designers.
Well, and I think that's a whole different conversation for a different day.
It is, but at the same time, the people coming from the sciences becoming more of the learning engineers are coming in, and it's going to make people cranky when they get the management jobs because they've learned how to do project management, because that's what learning engineers do. And somebody here was just talking about the project. Kristen was talking about the project management. And instructional design being here, being somewhat parallel, because you end up being the jack of all trades and the master of many.
Right.
But if you do it well, I mean, here's the funny thing: if you do your job really well, nobody notices what you're doing. And so here we are. Our reward is to not be noticed as much. Maybe we need to brag about our technical acumen a little bit more. I don't know.
Well, and I think that's related to the, if it looks easy, then it must not have been hard to do. And, like we were talking about how in the last year, everybody's sort of valued it a little bit more, but I'm not sure if they valued ID more or just valued that, like, there's somebody who actually knows how to run the Zoom thing for a classroom more. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, yes, we had knowledge this year that other people didn't have, but mostly it was how Zoom worked, for classes. So I mean, I
So
don't
what
want
if
to be
we move
cynical
to
about
more of
that,
a
but
competency framework for ID, right?
Mhm.
Because Ellen, when you were talking, you were like, because we have to decide. It's like, well, who the hell is we in the first place in this
Well,
conversation? And because there's going to be a we pocket over here and a we pocket over here that believes something different and a we pocket
well,
over there. So
and
how do you?
we're all part of it, which is why our ability to, I started doing a little bit of this recently, looking at sort of learning engineering, not because I love learning engineering, but this is the same conversation in a place that a whole body of practitioners that have never been in our conversations are now having our conversations, and we're not even the loudest voices in the room, which is really, that's more disturbing to me than probably any part of what I'm watching in the evolution of this stuff, because there are some assumptions that it is these days, it is technologically oriented enough that you need to have a programming degree to be a good worker in this space. So do we want that for ID? Well, maybe not. This is it ID little I, little d, that we are instructional designers, that we have to have designed for learning, experience, and performance. All three of those are going to have slightly different expectations. And what I think we're going to find will be a core of competencies that anybody, this is the secret handshake thing. We need to be able to recognize ourselves as practitioners wherever we work, whether we're in the construction trades or whether we're in pharma or whether we're in K-12. If we're a profession, there are things we all do that are the same. Well, so let's face it, there might be 6 big things that we all do the same and 140 that are not. But that's where the other very specific discipline groups would come in and deal with all those things you have to do. I think it would be awesome to call together people like Jane or me, or people, Angela Gunder at the Online Learning Consortium, or the ATD people, and start saying, let's set aside the contexts within which we work and to consider what are the core competencies for people who are involved in these things that carry this label. I started on some of this. I'm starting to see people. Well, one of the nice things about working with a bunch of professors is that they think that research is the only thing that really matters in the world. But they also want people to pay attention to their research. And there's nothing worse for a bunch of professors than realizing that nobody outside their own little communities actually sees any of the things that they do. I think that this is a piece of the puzzle that we've all been thinking
Yeah.
about. Well, people should take us seriously. There's a campaign here that people like us really have to take seriously about. The campaign is we want to have people take our profession more seriously. Well, who's a part of that profession? And what are their contributions? And what can we do? And then we get to market ourselves in a way that you have to turn to places like the Learning Guild. I mean, I'm even going to say this as AECT, because my professors have to come out of their academic departments and to share what they know, because they talk to each other. We could be so much smarter if we were able to extract some of that stuff for us.
Well, I think that's really important, because honestly, like, you and Carl Cap are it as far as I know of people who I think are genuinely straddling the divide between kind of workplace and academic. And by and
Who's
large,
Ellen? You have a friend at Boise. What's his name?
Stevie Achika
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure there are others, but
Yeah.
but I mean, people who are genuinely have a foot in both worlds and know people in both spaces, and, potentially can, because I don't know if we're any worse than any other fields. It's not clear to me, but there is a really big divide, right? Like the conferences.
Oh, yeah.
All of my friends from grad school who went on to PhD stuff, they're not going to any of my industry conferences. They're going to their own conferences. And, and I'm in conferences with practitioner people and things like that. And there are people at those conferences who are like Jane, who have, PhDs, and so obviously have the academic credentials, but still spend most of their time over in workplace as opposed to being embedded in academia. And so, like I said, you and Carl, and that's kind of it in my, I'm sure if I really stretched out in the network, I could find some people that would qualify for that, and there's people who are teaching adjunct or, doing both things, but this genuine like kind of meeting of workplace and academia is rare, it seems like.
Well, the cool thing for people like us in this, those of us who create the experiences, whether we're dealing with instruction or training or what have you, we are really the brokers of that conversation between the research and the technology and the application. So, even if we were to think bravely about, a stake in the, I can tell you right now, I could probably find about 15 very antsy academics who want to change the world because it makes them mad that we're still having these same conversations per Cammy. And we could find about 20 of those people and about 20 of us, and we could find a few more from some of the groups that we work with, and maybe even just call a summit of ourselves. Now we'd have to organize it. But the fact is that one of the things we haven't necessarily done is to think about how we take care of ourselves in this, because listen, guys, we've learned how to look like our customers. We take pride in looking like our customers. We have done such a good job in looking like our customers that we have disappeared as far as they're concerned. They don't know how different we are.
Mhm.
So, okay, we can stay there and be stuck, but I think it would be I'm feeling like one of the things we all learned this last year is you also don't know what's going to come down at you, so you can't miss an opportunity if it presents itself to you. Wouldn't it be great for us to take some of this energy on what we've learned this last year and say, you know what, we can do this differently? We could,
It would be great. I am going to wrap us up there because, oh my gosh, we went through that hour really, really fast. And apparently we're going to have to talk about this for another 20 years to solve this problem.
Looks like.
But let's hope not. Let's hope not. Ellen's creating a summit and we're all going to go out to California and drink wine and attend that. But maybe we'll just give you each a moment if you'd like to give us your shameless plug, what you might have going on, what's coming up next for you. Ellen, do you got something?
Actually,
other than your brand new job?
Well, just that on July 1st, I just happened to have a meeting to talk about this kind of topic, and you guys, I didn't know it was going to be this topic, but now I do.
Fantastic. How about Cammy? What you've got? You're working on your book again, a new edit?
Yeah, that's part of my plan. If you've read my book and you have any suggestions for what I should include in the new edition, let me know. Yeah, I don't know. We're busy selling a lot of e-learning to corporates. So if you know anyone out there, send them to Kinio's way. That would be my shameless plug.
Here you go.
How about Jane? You just put out a research report. We did have the link. We'll bring it up again. But what's your next one coming up?
But I wrote a nuts and bolts of instructional design and training and development column for Learning Solutions for a decade. And we compiled all those into a free ebook that came out yesterday. I think it's 190 pages of columns about ID, arranged by Addie, compiled into a single source. So that's just out yesterday.
That's out
through what?
It's from the Guild.
It's from the Guild. All right, great. Thank you.
The Learning Guild.
If you get us a link, we'll put it in show notes and stuff like that.
I'll go get it real quick. I didn't know we were going to get asked that. I wanted to pump the.
There's always shameless plugs.
I thought we were talking about degrees today, so I'm with Ellen. I apologize. I didn't.
You are. There's always shameless plugs. Julie, you have any shameless plugs?
Nothing too extraordinary. I think a lot of people know that there's a Facebook group for Design for How People Learn out there, and you're welcome to jump into that conversation if you aren't already. And it's really actually a very active place to have. There was a thread recently where it was like 30 comments long on learning instructional objectives, and I was just like, oh my God, learning objectives, you can talk about it at great length. You are my people. So we'll drop in the link for the Facebook group if you're not already in there. Otherwise, both Jean and I are producing in the Learning and Development Conference right now, which has actually been kind of a fun thing. It's a 6-week conference run through the LDA folks, Learning Development Accelerator. Is that right? Learning Design Accelerator? Oh shoot, I should know. I'm only on the board, I think. But yeah, we'll put links to all of that stuff in the show notes. So thank you for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a happy Friday and a happy weekend.
See you. Bye.
Josie, can you hang on one sec?
Thank you.
Super fun. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.